Anybody remember this guy? This is Shoko Asahara, the supposedly blind leader of the Japanese doomsday cult, Aum Shinrikyo, that successfully released several sarin nerve gas devices in the Tokyo subway system on March 20, 1995. They killed 13 commuters and sickened as many as 6,000 others. I was in the US Navy and stationed in Japan during this time but was not directly affected by this particular gas attack. After the attack, all of the American military personnel were all issued chemical weapons gear and received chemical weapons training. My experience occurred on May 5, 1995. On that day, a friend, Donnie, and I had the day off and decided to go to a Japanese amusement park, Tashimin. We spent the day goofing around and riding the rides. Of course, we left our chemical weapons gear at the base as we didn't want to drag the bulky equipment around with us. We left the park early in the evening and headed back to our base, Naval Air Facility at Tsuji. We were taking the trains and subways to get back to base. This is how most people got around in Japan. Their mass transit system is amazing. We were in Shinjuku Station transferring from one train line to another when something became obviously wrong. This was the beginning of the evening rush hour and Shinjuku Station is the busiest station in the world, with over 1 million people moving through every day. All of a sudden, the authorities were trying to get everyone out of there. We didn't know exactly what was going on, but we could guess that it wasn't good. People closer to the entrances were herded out into the streets. People closer to the trains were loaded on the whatever trains were already in the station for a fast departure. No new trains were being allowed in. We were closer to the trains so we were loaded onto a train. Perhaps you have seen the images of the officials in Japan by the trains pushing people in the train cars in order to pack in as many people as possible. Well, they were packing even more people in than I had ever experienced in my entire time in Japan from 1993 to 1996. Everyone in the station had to get out immediately and the existing trains in the station at that time were put into full service. It was stifling in the train car. People were packed in so tightly that you couldn't move any part of your body. Fortunately, I am rather tall so I was able to see over everyone's head. It was just one solid mass of people, but the Japanese commuters remained calm and reserved. I never saw anyone panic during this incident. But you could feel the tension in the air, as everyone was concerned. They finally got everyone packed in and the train left. My friend and I made it back to our base later that evening and turned on the news to see what it was exactly that we had just been through. We learned that Aum Shinrikyo had placed a hydrogen cyanide device in a bathroom of Shinjuku Station. The device had enough poison to kill 20,000 people. A quick-thinking janitor had found the device and had disabled it just before it could go off and potentially kill or sicken us and very many of our fellow commuters. This was the last poison gas attack that the cult was ever able to attempt before the Japanese authorities were able to make enough arrests and effectively shut down their operations. The experience will always remain seared into my mind. I was in Vietnam in 1967 as a Marine grunt. I saw plenty of action, terrible action, and have 2 press unit citations as well as 2 Purple Hearts. But one of the worst experiences was my last day in Vietnam. I had been wounded again. This time shot in the leg. After 2 weeks I was flown back out to my company's position on a hill. I was there to turn in my gear, say bye to those I served beside and get ready to leave Vietnam. But when I arrived the company was out in the field. I never got to say goodbye to the people I fought beside for nearly a year, which was bad enough. But about 4 hours later my helicopter came to pick me up. But I was told something bad happened, and I needed to wait a couple of hours. The reason was my company had stumbled into an ambush, and they were still fighting. There was no one from our company in this area, just the artillery folks who had been protecting. And they needed me to recognize the dead. They had dog tags, but the officers wanted a second verification. A few minutes later helicopters started coming in, and it was so sad seeing chopper after chopper land and they carried off dead bodies. Thankfully I didn't have to do that. Then they laid them out on army cots and had me walk by each and tell them the name of each Marine. I remember there being 13 Marines laid out, including my squad leader and 4 of my squad. Of the 13 Marines I could recognize only 10 of them. Again, this shows how bad some wounds are. They are people I was very familiar with but couldn't recognize them because of the severity of the wounds. Seeing 13 of my friends dead and nothing I could do was horrible. An hour later as I was flying out, I was weeping like a little girl because I was leaving my men behind, and they desperately needed my help. It was an incredibly sad departure. For decades later they wrote a book about our exploits. Until I read that book, I didn't realize not 13, but 22 of my buddies fell that day, out of a total of 102 Marines. Including every member of my squad, meaning I would probably be dead if I had been there. War is hell, and incredibly sad. As a Marine, I used to have the graveyard patrol shift at the Beirut bombing memorial. Part of the memorial is dedicated to a veteran cemetery. Oddly enough, I never got freaked out being completely alone in a remote cemetery, in the middle of the night, surrounded by dense woods on all sides. It was actually kind of peaceful, to be honest. However, one night, this peace was disrupted when I was patrolling near the perimeter fence where some of the oldest headstones are, when I heard the sound of a woman humming. I followed the sound to see who was crazy enough to be here at this time of the night and noticed a light glowing through the vines and brush of a large tree. As I approached, I could literally feel the hair on my neck beginning to lift as if there was an electric current in the air. I pushed aside the brush and what I saw nearly took my breath away. It was an old, weathered headstone with a large cross etched into the marble. Only the cross was glowing a bright, vivid blue, like a neon bulb. The humming was also suddenly much louder and had a weird plurality to it, like it was coming from hundreds of voices at once, and obviously there was no one anywhere near that headstone. Needless to say, I got freaked out of my mind. I screamed like a scared little girl and sprinted back to the parking lot. I radioed the guard who was supposed to take the shift after me and forced him to come early, then spent the rest of my shift inside of his truck. I don't think he believed me, but he stayed with me in the truck and didn't go out on patrol until the sun was fully up. A few days later, I worked up the nerve to return to the grave, during the day of course. As I suspected, in the light of day it was a completely mundane headstone. There was no name, only the aforementioned cross. I ran my hands over the stone and checked to see if maybe there was some sort of hidden light source or solar panel, but no, it was just plain, solid, unremarkable stone. The humming was gone, too. I eventually returned to my normal shift, but never again experienced anything out of the ordinary around that headstone. I never learned whose grave that was, either, but I find myself thinking about it from time to time. It certainly sounds absurd when I say it out loud, and I suppose it could have been a hallucination or a trick of my tired brain, but I don't believe it was. I think it was real, a ghost or spirit of some sort, but I don't think it was evil at all. These are my dad's stories. He served in the Taiwanese Marines as a drill sergeant. Much of the ground in Taiwan saw violence, and it was rumored that his base was built on or near a mass grave. Needless to say, he's had a few paranormal stories. He had a guy report to him in the morning exhausted that the night before, he had been on guard duty, overlooking the firing range. The targets on the range were a mix of clay and wood figures, cut and drawn to look like an enemy soldier aiming a rifle at you. According to the guard, when he'd been bored out of his mind staring out over the range, he saw clear as day one of the clay soldiers wearily lay down his rifle and exclaimed, "Damn, I'm tired." The guard said he passed out from sheer fright. During the evening, when training was over, the sergeants for the most part had the time to themselves. My dad liked to go snake hunting during dusk, so one evening he sets out, carrying a bag, a nice long stick, and a flashlight. As he was making his way across the field, zigzagging in a search pattern, he found himself getting closer and closer to an old, decrepit outhouse that had been abandoned as it was too far from the main base. As he got within a few yards of it, he was hit with a sudden feeling of apprehension. Something told him going near the outhouse was a bad idea. At that moment, his flashlight, aimed right at the construct, went out. He fiddled with the battery, smacked it, thought, better get a new battery, and turned around to head back. The moment he turned and faced the main base, the flashlight flickered back on. Great, time to keep hunting, he thought to himself. The moment he turned to face the outhouse, it flickered off again. Faced the base, it flickered on. He did this 2 or 3 times, got the message, verbally apologized for intruding, turned and walked calmly back to base. The base itself was surrounded by forest and mountains, the natural terrain of Taiwan. One day a soldier was reported missing. As the day went on, it was clear that he'd either deserted or was in serious trouble. A manhunt/rescue team was organized and most of the base was out searching for the guy as the rain started to come in. As night fell, they called it off, and got ready to try again tomorrow. They found him in the morning, huddled in a wet, dark cave, scared speechless and out of his mind. No one was sure what he saw to cause him to freak out, and they never found out. They shipped the guy out soon afterwards.